session of the series that we planned last year from the Survey's Geoheritage Expert Group. We called it the contribution of geological surveys to geoconservation. We already had one last year in November. You can see there the first session, and today we will have we had 3 volunteers kindly offering to talk about their experience in relation with geoheritage and geotourism. So first we will hear Elisa Brustia from ISPRA in Italy. She will talk about the broken mountain geoheritage related to Mount Vettore surface faulting. Then we will listen to Linda Wickström about the Fulufjället National Park. Why are there so many rocks there? She is from the Swedish Geological Survey. And for the last one, we will be Kirstin Lemon from the British Geological Survey, the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, who will be talking about the threats and opportunities for geological heritage at key tourism sites, examples from the giant Casueway World Heritage Site. So let me... How do I go back? I don't know how to go. I have to stop sharing. Okay, so everybody has seen the program, and we will start right away. Maybe Juana Vegas is already asking for... Juana? Is there a problem? Can you hear me?
I think it was just an accident.
Okay. So then we will start right away so we can optimize it. So first will be Elisa talking about the broken mountain and the geoheritage related to this Mount Vettore surface faulting. You can go ahead, Elisa.
Okay, I share my screen.
Please.
Okay, can you see my screen?
It's coming. Okay, now we can see it.
Okay.
You will
Yes.
have to start the presentation. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, there we are. Thank you.
So, I am Elisa Brustia from ISPRA, Geological Surveys of Italy. And I'm going to introduce a project focused on the 2016 Central Italy earthquake surface faulting and concern enhancement and protection along the Monte Vettore-Monte Bove fault system. It is a joint project realized by ISPRA and Monte Sibillini National Park. Monte Sibillini National Park is a wonderful place in central Apennines, visited and appreciated by many tourists. There, it is possible to choose several types of tourism: food and beverage for its ancient tradition, environmental, sports tourism for trekking, mountain bike riding, ski, also religious and cultural. In these photos are shown some Sibillini's landscapes. As you know, starting on 23rd August 2016, a wide sector of central Italy, including Sibillini's area, was hit by a sequence of earthquakes that started with a magnitude 6.0 event with epicenter in Accumuli, and culminated with a magnitude 6.5 event with epicenter in Norcia. Several magnitudes more than 5.0 shocks characterized the sequence until January 2017. During the first shock in August, about 300 people died, mainly in the territory of Amatrice, Accumuli, and Arquata del Tronto, where most buildings have been destroyed. In the areas of Visso, Usita, and Castel Sant'Angelo sul Nera, the highest impact was due to the 26th and 30 October event. Main shocks did not cause extra victims, but destroyed a lot of buildings located in Marche region and in some areas of Umbria, changing in a few seconds the life of many peoples. During the earthquakes, continuous surface breaking formed on the ground for a total length of about 30 kilometers. Geologists interpreted these ruptures as the seismogenetic fault. In the photos are documented some breaking interpreted as evidence of earthquake. These cosismic ruptures along Monte Vettore and Monte Bove fault system represent the largest and most documented surface faulting example in Italy. 3 areas have been identified along the fault system to be preserved and to be pointed out with the aim of showing and describing this geological evidence, also at a non-specialist audience. These areas are also identified as a national geoheritage and part of National Inventory of Geosites. The first one is Colli Alti e Bassi, where the recent cosismic rupture is marked by a white stripe at the base of the fault plane, allowing to estimate the amount of displacement in about 60 centimeters. The breaking interests Mesozoic limestone and displacement. It was induced by the 30 October shock. To reach geosite, it is needed to walk along a large white street for a few hundred meters from the parking near the driveway. The access is very easy. The second one, the southern one, is Monte Vettoretto, is along an erosional gully in the southern slope of the mount. Shows a total displacement of about 70 centimeters. The rift interests Mesozoic limestone, but his hanging wall is characterized by debris due to the presence of the little valley. The access is easy. There is a small path indicated by a panel located along the principal driveway. The last one, and the most important, is Cordone del Vettore fault scarp, where it is possible to observe a total amount of displacement of about 2 meters high. The fault breaks Mesozoic limestone. A panel at the beginning of the path indicates the access, but in 1.5 to 2 hours, it is possible to arrive at Sella del Vettore, where it is possible to observe the Monte del Vettore big displacement, described and represented in a panel. The path to arrive to reach the surface faulting is unofficial. It is long and dangerous, and it is not recommended to go. The goals of the project are 2. First, to increase public awareness to natural hazards, and to keep the memory of the event through the enhancement of the identified sites. The project consists of a geological itinerary marked by 12 spots, where information boards illustrate surface faulting phenomena and other ground effects induced by the 2016 earthquake. The panels are in viewpoints where it is possible to observe the geological context helped by line drawing and scheme. Other panels are located in parking areas near road to indicate the pedestrian path to reach the geosites. Others are just close to geosites we yet seen. For example, Colli Alti e Bassi with more information about the activation and tectonic elements. Also, Colli Alti, no, this is Monte Vettoretto, and the big one, Cordone del Vettore, with the line drawing and details. Other sites represented earthquake secondary effects on the ground, like a deep gravitative deformation, for example, in Passo Cattivo, as the bottom right. Two introductive panels in Visso and in Arquata del Tronto at the gates of the park, commemorating the victims of the tragedy and introduce the visitors to join the geological itinerary. The people interested in learning more about the 2016 earthquake will be able to access directly from their smartphone to further multimedia web resources, like video and papers, through a QR code in every panel. The project also includes some protection works against weathering on the fault mirrors with special protective resins. Furthermore, metal plates was posed to indicate the entity of displacement. In order to complete the project, a training course for park guides was organized by ISPRA and his specialists. The course was about the geological itinerary, geoheritage, and seismic hazard. In November 2021, when the technical activities finished and the difficulties associated with the pandemic period improved, 2 days course was organized. On the first day, the lessons were held online, and the next day, a field trip lessons were done. 2016-17 Central Italy earthquakes, as well as causing many death and destruction, represents a deep and painful wound. Close to technical activities, the project expects some meetings with local people and to inform them about the project activities and to raise their interest in Vettore geosites, an asset they own. In this case, the relationship between the geosites and the recent tragedy is still too much felt. So to respect for their sensibility was good to get on carefully. Also, the difficulties created by pandemic changed the times of activities, and in this moment we still haven't done a meeting. In conclusion, the local people trust in tourism, important to recover from disaster and recent COVID period. We think geoheritage is a richness every day more know and appreciate, not only for scientific reasons, but also for cultural tourism, whose pillars are awareness in natural processes, consciousness, and respect. Thanks all. Thanks for the attention. Other info you can see the site of Sibillini, of Monte Sibillini.
Thank you very much, Elisa. I think the best will be if we continue with all three. Thank you for keeping to the time, and then we will get the questions for in general. I hope that is okay. We already have 37 participants. Thank you all for attending our webinar, and we will go now into the next presentation. That is Linda Wickström from the Swedish Geological Survey, who will talk about the Fulufjället National Park. And why are there so many rocks? Linda? She's attempting to share. Okay. Now we are seeing it. Good. Thank you. You have your microphone? We don't hear you. Oh. We don't hear you yet.
Hello, do you hear me now?
Okay, yes, Linda.
Okay, good. It was the headset this time.
Okay, so go ahead and start.
Okay. My name is Linda Wickström, and I'm a geologist at the Geological Survey of Sweden and have been working with geoheritage and geotourism for like 20 years now, I think. And I'm going to talk about some experiences that we've had during two Interreg projects we've had together with the Norwegian Geological Survey. So the title of this talk is why are there so many rocks at Mount Fulufjället? Because that is what the visitors want to know. Why? And these Interreg projects, they lasted between GEARS, which is the first one, lasted between 2017 and 2020, and GNIST between 2020 and finished last year. Oops. I'm just trying to get to the next slide. There we go. In GEARS, we had some activities where we would about geoconservation for management people, the people working with nature protection and management of protected areas in Sweden, mostly. We also produced a guide manual, a geological guide manual for the national park, for one of their gorges, which is called Kloran. We also had a small field course for the local national park guides, which was very popular. And some of the things I will talk about in this talk is how we presented it to them. We also had a cooperation with the County Administrative Board in Dalarna, which was one of the partners, where we helped them with ideas for their future geology exhibition at the visitor centers of the national park. And in the project, we also developed and tested a method for description and evaluation of geosites together with NINA and the Norwegian Geological Survey. And it was a very successful project with many good opportunities to talk about geoheritage and tourism and all that to geologists and also non-geologists. In GNIST, we could take this further on and described and evaluated a number of geosites in the area and in the surrounding area as well. And we developed actually a new database of geosites and a web map service that we have together with the Norwegian Geological Survey. So you can actually see sites on in both countries at the same time. And the visitor center at Fulufjället also have a new geology exhibition thanks to the project. And in the project, we also held a webinar series on interpretation and geology. Remember that GNIST was actually a project running in the middle of COVID, so we had problems with meeting each other and seeing the tourism industry. So we had a webinar series instead, and it was very popular. We had about 110 people attending the seminar series in total, like people enrolled for it, and in general there were like 50 people during each occasion, which I have to say that it was a very good good number of participants. And this is just to tell you about who were in the projects. The green ones are the organizations that were the same in both projects. In GNIST, we had some other organizations as well. Visit Dalarna, which is the tourism organization in Dalarna. We also had a council and an organization in Norway called Norske Parker. And in GEARS, we also had a few more universities. Folldal Gruver in Norway, which is a visiting mine, and the County Administrative Board in Innlandet in Norway, and a few more. So, Fulufjället, I'm sure that most of you actually have no clue where that is, and you can see on the map there's a red dot, which is where Fulufjället is. It's in the central of Sweden, not very far north, and very close to the Norwegian border. So you can actually, the mountain itself is actually split between Sweden and Norway. So, and it's been a national park in Sweden since 2002, and in 2012 it also became a national park in Norway. So it's a good area for a combined national park interest. So, and it was named a national park to preserve a southern mountain region with special vegetation and great nature values in untouched conditions. So that's the reasons why Fulufjället became a national park on the Swedish side. So why do people go here? It's mainly three reasons why people go to this place. First, they want to see the tall waterfall, Djupeskär. It's 70 meters tall and is among the tallest in Sweden, and quite impressive to look at. And then another reason is to see Old Chico, which is a spruce that's 9,550 years old. So it's not the tree itself, it's the root system, which is that old. So that is the oldest tree in Sweden, and I think it's the oldest tree in Europe or something like that. So that's what people go and look at. And they also look at the remnants of the rain disaster that happened in 1997, when 400 millimeters of rain fell during 2 days in a very specific spot. And it was a lot of water coming off the mountain. And you can see in this picture, it's actually my colleague Gunnel, which is to the left of the trees. So you can get some kind of scale there. And these trees were actually standing up further up, and they were all pushed down along with the water masses. So this is mainly why people go to this part of Sweden. And in the national park, you have a visitor center. You have a lot of hiking trails. You have cabins where you can stay overnight. You have wind shelters where you can also stay overnight, that are prepared with wood, so you can make a fire and take care of yourself. It's not allowed to go by bike on the mountain because then the trails and tracks will all get ruined. So, and I have a few numbers of visitors. During the pandemic, there were 83,690 visitors, 187,300 in 2021, which is really, really good. And you could see that people, when they couldn't be inside, people were actually going outside, outdoors instead. And last year, the visitors numbers were down to 68,000, but it's still very, very good and far better than the years before. And Naturum, that is the visitor center, so they have different counters, but the number of visitors have increased a lot. So they have had to do some increasing the parking spaces and things like that to be able to welcome everyone that wants to go there. So why this question? Why are there so many rocks? That's what the what Sofia, which is the woman who works there, she gets this question every day from people that's been up on the mountain. Why is it so rocky? Why is it so difficult to walk and climb and so forth? So that's what we try to help her with, and so we went back to the Quaternary and then talked about the Quaternary, which is the most recent history, and it's a time of glaciations and time of changes in climate. So you have arrival of the ice age, and you have 2 to 3 kilometers thick ice sheets in this area. But most people think that the ice was there all the time, but it wasn't, as most geologists know. So there were time periods with no ice. And the ice, a big land ice, affects the ground surface in different ways. You have areas with no effect at all. You have erosion and you have deposition. And we can see all this on Fulufjället, and that's why it is so rocky. And this soil map to the left here, which is where you can see the blue, that is deposited material, and the much in the some of the, is it yellowish? A lot is erosion. So on Fulufjället, you have 2 different landscapes, and as a geologist, I think this is very fascinating. As a normal person, you just don't see it. You just see the tumble of rocks, and you just wonder why. So on the northern parts of the mountain, you have a younger landscape with lakes and hummocky moraine, and in the south, you have a well-developed patterned ground and flat till. So in the photograph, you can see the red arrow. That's the direction of the ice. So you can see how the ice has actually moved the rocks forward, and after that left this lakey landscape. And the older landscape, you can in LiDAR you can see that it's a very flat surface. And if you go closer and take photographs, you can see permafrost structures and traces of Arctic tundra. And that's climate conditions that aren't developing today. And these are very old. And then the younger landscape, you have a lot of lakes, and it's more boulders everywhere. So you can also see a difference in when you look at LiDAR, for instance. And then also the melting water has reshaped the landscape and transported the blocks and gravels to other places, which is also very clearly seen. And that's also when you walk up and down, that's very often drainage channels of different kinds. So that's the quaternary, but the rocks in itself, what are they? That's also what people ask. And how did Fulufjället get its shape? I used to call it the last outpost because it's on the border to Norway, and it's like, from the Swedish point of view, it's a very solitude sort of kind of mountain, whereas in Norway you have a more hilly landscape. So if you go from Norway, it's the end. If you go from Sweden, it's the beginning. So this part of the world has been uplifted and then affected by weathering and erosion, and it's the weathering and erosion that has actually shaped the mountain. Because Fulufjället's area, it is in the middle of this of the, I don't know if you can see my pointer. You probably can't. It's actually where you see the name Dala sandstone. It's just above that. It's squeezed between two younger orogenies. So this part of the world has a sandstone that's 1500 million years old, and it's been squeezed between the Caledonian orogeny and the Svico-Norwegian orogeny. So it's also one of those places that has actually managed to survive. And what is difficult to explain to people, I think anyway, is that, so how did Earth look like 1500 million years ago? Then you have to talk about that there were lands and there were continents and there were oceans. The continents didn't look like today. It's difficult to reconstruct how they looked and where they were on Earth. Yes, there was life on Earth at this time, but it was primarily cyanobacteria and other single-celled organisms. So no bugs and no insects or no dinosaurs, anything like, or fish or anything like that. And the oceans were also different. There were oceans, but they were sulfur and iron rich. And during this period of time, you had to change to more oxygenated environments, which favored, of course, then the evolution of life. And when you talk to these non-geologists, it's always good to remind them that the geological processes are similar, despite during and when in Earth history they were formed, because that makes it's easy to do modern analogs, which they often can relate to. At Fulufjället, the bedrock geology is quite simple. You have three kinds of rocks. You have a sandstone that's very old, and you have a dolerite that's slightly younger, and you have a basalt that's surrounding the mountain. That's so what they see is actually the sandstone. That's what people see, and they can see the dolerite at some places. So then you talk and try to explain what a basalt is. And when you say that it's a flowing lava and show them pictures from Hawaii or something like that, then it's all very, very fascinating. And then they can go to this place, for instance. This is actually below the mountain, but here you can actually see individual lava flows that are about 1500 million years old. And that's quite impressive, I think. And you can see pillar lavas, and you have jasper and epidot that's been formed around them, surrounding them. So that's one fascinating thing about this place. And when you talk about the dolerites, you tell them that you have magma that's been penetrating the crust. Instead of magma sort of flowing out on the sandstone, you have magma penetrating the crust, forming dikes. And you can see them in LiDAR, which is very nice. I've drawn a yellow line here so you can actually see them better. And you can see them in the field, either like to the right where you have the dolerite in the dark, and the sandstone quartzite is actually weathering quite bright in some places. And then you talk about the sandstone, which is what they see more or less, that it's sedimentary rocks, and the common minerals are quartz and feldspar. And you can also see a very nice conglomerate in this sandstone in some places. And then also that the sandstone is composed of fragments, cement, matrix, and cavities. And then you can talk about what these cavities are filled of, for instance, or what they can be filled of. And when people look at these rocks, what do they notice? Well, yes, they notice structures and colors, and they want to know, why is the sandstone red? And why is it yellow at some places? And why does it look funny? And things like that. So that's very, as a geologist, it's not very difficult to talk about. You just have to think that they don't want the deep story. They just want to know why does it look like, why does the ripple look like they do, and where can they have been formed? What is more difficult to actually explain sometimes is actually the changes in colors, where you have the very fine grain mud parts of the sections, which are quite purplish red, whereas the more coarse grained layers are quite bright, actually, or whitish. And then you have other processes that can change the color of the rock. You can have weathering, which is what you have to the on the picture to the right, where it weathers black. And you can also have hydrothermal solutions bleaching the rock, creating patterns like the patterns to the left. So that is mostly what people in the end want to know. It's the structures and the colors. And then also, if you can tell a fancy story about why the structures look like they do, and why the colors are like they are, then it's they like it. Thank you.
That's it? Okay. Thank you very much, Linda. I thought you were going to finish with some more conclusions. Or, that's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's no problem. It's a good example to all the things that you have been doing at this national park for the tourists. Okay, so we will talk. I mean, I'll have some questions later. And now the third and last one that will be talking will be Kirstin Lemon from the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, of the British Geological Survey, and she will be talking about the threats and opportunities for geological heritage at key tourism sites, examples from the giant Casueway World Heritage Site.
Thank you, Enrique. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully, is that working okay?
Yes, we can see it. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. As Enrique says, my name is Kirstin Lemon. I'm a senior geologist at the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland. Just to explain a little bit about what the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland is, we are an office of the Northern Ireland Government Department for the Economy, but we are staffed by scientists from the British Geological Survey, so that's why I've got the two logos up there. My role is to look after a number of work programmes, and one of those is environmental change and geological hazards, but the other one is called Science for Society, where part of my role is to develop geological tourism in Northern Ireland and also to work with those places to understand geological heritage. So it's in that vein that I'm talking this afternoon. So what I would like to do first of all is to introduce you to the Giant's Causeway and Causeway Coast World Heritage Site to give it its full name. I'll then explain how tourism works at the World Heritage Site, and then I'll go on to explain some of the threats to the geological heritage there, and also look at some of the opportunities for geological heritage, just to finish up. So first of all, the Giant's Causeway, where exactly is it? I'm going to try and see if I can find a pointer so I can just give you a little bit of an idea. So in the little map in the corner, we've got a map of Northern Ireland. Here is Belfast, and the Giant's Causeway is approximately 100 kilometres away from Belfast. On this map, the World Heritage Site is marked with the green dashed line. It's around about 5 kilometres in total across and only about half a kilometre wide. So it's not a very big site. It's really served very well by the Giant's Causeway Visitor Centre that opened up in 2012, but the majority of the site is made up by paths. They go along the top of the cliff, but they also go along down past the causeway and on all the other main sites as well. You'll notice that the cliff top path extends all the way across the World Heritage Site, but the path down here, the dashed one, has been closed since 1994, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So it's made up of a predominantly marine environment, but it's also got a terrestrial component too, as you would expect. Next. So this is the iconic image of the Giant's Causeway. This is what everybody knows. It's made up of approximately 40,000 basalt columns, and that's the image that people associate with the Giant's Causeway. But it's about a whole lot more than that, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment. Just to talk a little bit about the geology, I've put in a geology map here, and to a geologist, this geological map actually does not look very exciting at all, because the Giant's Causeway is made up really of one main rock type, and that's basalt. So the basalt formed during the Paleogene period, or the Paleocene to be precise, around about 60 million years ago, and was formed as a result of volcanic activity associated with the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. There are 3 main layers of basalt. We've got the pale pink, which is what we call the lower basalt formation. And then on top of that, we've got this orangey layer. This orangey layer represents the upper weathered surface of the lower basalt formation, and it's what we call the interbasaltic formation. And then the darker pink, this bit here, is called the Causeway Tholeite member, and again, it's basalt as well. So being a World Heritage Site, it has to have outstanding universal value, and I'll apologise for this image because it's nothing to do with the Giant's Causeway. It's just the BGS house style. So I've lifted out this section of a description from the UNESCO website, and I'm not going to read it out, but I just want to pick out a few comments. First of all, the outstanding universal value of the causeway is because of its unique exposure of 40,000 kilometre basalt, and I've talked about that already. But it should be remembered that it's not just the geology, it's not just the basalt columns, it's the way this place looks. It's inspired legends. It's called the Giant's Causeway for a reason, because it's associated with an Irish giant who had a fight with a Scottish giant. And it really is celebrated in the arts and in science all the way across the world. It's been a visitor attraction for at least 300 years. And this bit at the end, it's become regarded as a symbol for Northern Ireland. So our geological heritage is very much ingrained in Northern Ireland society as a whole, if you like. It's part of Northern Ireland's soul. So just to explore the outstanding universal value a bit more, each World Heritage Site gets inscribed on the World Heritage List depending on what criterion it fulfills. The Giant's Causeway is one of only 2% of World Heritage Sites around the world that have been inscribed because of their geological heritage. Been inscribed under Criterion 7, which is geology, and Criterion 8, which is landscape. Criterion 7 is really talking about the columnar massive basalts at the cliff edge, so it's talking about the cliff exposures. And then the landscape setting is really to do with the fact that it shows you the sequence of events during the Paleogene period that really let us understand better the events in the North Atlantic. Just to explain, I've used the word tertiary here because that's how it's written on the UNESCO website. So it'll give you an idea about why the Giant's Causeway World Heritage Site is so important. So this is the characteristic view of the causeway. This is what's called the main causeway or the Grand Causeway. This is where the predominantly large number of the basalt columns can be found. But as the description of the geological heritage showed us, it's not just about those columns of basalt, it's also about the cliffs. So we can see some really lovely exposures of the lower basalt formation. We can see the interbasaltic formation, this lovely red layer of laterite. And then you can see the upper causeway tholite member as well. So the causeway columns are really only a small part of why this place is so special, but it is the reason why most people come to see it. So now I just want to talk a little bit about the site ownership and management, because it's really important for how tourism has developed on the site. The Giant's Causeway and the Causeway Coast World Heritage Site is made up of around about 240 hectares of land. 2/3 of that is owned by the Crown Estate. So the Crown Estate is essentially sovereign property. It doesn't belong to the monarch, but it does essentially make revenue that they can then use to input into the British government. About 1/3 of it is then owned collectively by the National Trust, the local council, and 3 local landowners. However, the site is managed by the National Trust. The National Trust is Europe's largest conservation charity. They own huge amounts of coast and countryside throughout England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and they own a lot of historic properties as well. So they are, if you like, the property managers. They are responsible for the operational management of the site, and they also coordinate all activity on a daily basis. The site also has a steering group. The steering group is there to ensure the implementation of the World Heritage Site Management. That takes into consideration conservation, tourism, economic value of the site. It also takes into consideration other aspects such as community interests. So they are there to ensure that is all implemented. And there's a couple of organisations I want to just highlight here. First of all, the Causeway Coast and Glens Heritage Trust. They are responsible for the secretariat for the steering group. We've also got the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, who are responsible for geological conservation. We've also got Tourism Northern Ireland, who are responsible for marketing Northern Ireland. And we've also got my department, the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, under the auspices of the Department for the Economy. I just want to point out a few things as well here. The Causeway Coast and Glens logo, not surprisingly, has got a hexagon representing the Causeway basalts. But if you'll notice, Tourism Northern Ireland, who are responsible for marketing all of Northern Ireland, use a hexagon as their logo. So does my department. This is the same logo used by every government department in Northern Ireland, although each one has got a different colour. So to give you an idea of the importance of Northern Ireland's geological heritage, and in particular importance of the Giant's Causeway. But just a little bit about the history of tourism at the site. The Giant's Causeway first came to the attention of the rest of the world back in the 17th century. It was painted as a watercolour by a Dublin artist named Susanna Drury. That painting became so popular, it was made into an engravement that was then sent all the way around Europe. And it then began to attract people to visit, because these rocks were an enigma. Nobody really understood how they formed, and their geometric shape meant that they're actually quite unusual. Since then, tourism to the Giant's Causeway has not stopped. The majority of people that come to Northern Ireland, and indeed the island of Ireland, want to come and visit the Giant's Causeway. These are just some posters that have been used in the early 20th century to promote Northern Ireland and Ireland. Each of them has the Giant's Causeway as its iconic image. So you'll see that there's ones that have been advertised to the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. We've also ones that have been promoted by the Ulster Tourist Development Association, but they've all been used to promote Northern Ireland, with the Giant's Causeway as the key iconic site. That continues to this day, because this is actually the slogan that is used by Northern Ireland Tourism: embrace a giant spirit. The word giant obviously comes from the Giant's Causeway, and this is one of the iconic images. As I mentioned before, although the geological heritage of the site is about so much more than just the basalt columns, They are what people come to see, although whenever they do come, we tell them about the full story. So I'm now going to move on and talk a little bit about some of the threats to the geological heritage. The Giant's Causeway is undoubtedly Northern Ireland's most popular tourist. I've already mentioned that people come to Northern Ireland to visit the Giant's Causeway. If they go somewhere else, that's fantastic, but they'll come to the Giant's Causeway first. We've seen a real dramatic increase in the amount of people that come to the site. The new visitor centre opened in 2012, which is obviously somewhere around here. And back then, visitor numbers were around about 600,000. They're now sitting at around 1 million visitors every year. Now, for some tourist attractions, you might not think that's very much, but if you think about the entire population of Northern Ireland, which is only 1.8 million people, that's actually quite a lot. And I've already showed you how small that site is. So again, that'll give you an idea of how much of an impact those visitors might have on the site. We've put together a little bit of an infographic. This is actually in the most recent management plan for the site. So back in 2005, we used to get 10 visitors for every stone. Remember, there's 40,000 of these columns and they call them stones in the management plan. In 2019, there was 25. So that's a huge increase in the number of people that come to visit the site. By people coming to the site, they put extra pressure on the natural environment. They not only cause weathering and erosion of the basalt columns themselves, but they also bring in bits of pollen, spores and seeds in their shoes, whether they know it or not. So vegetation is also increased on the stones, and more importantly, vegetation that would not normally be brought into the site naturally. This is more of a typical image of the Giant's Causeway. The ones I've showed you so far have been the touristic images. They're the photographs that we use to promote the Giant's Causeway. But in actuality, this is what you will see. Unless you come to the Giant's Causeway at 6 AM in the morning, or if you come late in the evening, you will be joined by lots of other people. So aside from the fact that there's being damage done to the site, it's also not a particularly enjoyable visitor experience. However, there is a positive to this story, and the positive, which will come as a surprise, I suppose, to most people, is COVID-19. COVID-19 gave us a chance to really rethink how the Giant's Causeway is looked at when it comes to visitors. I gave you figures there up to 2019, when we were having around about 1 million visitors every year. That visitor number has obviously plummeted. The 1 million visitors, around about 60% of them were international visitors, which is quite unique when it comes to Northern Irish tourist attractions. But that number is now much lower, and our visitors are much more domestic and much fewer. And so the National Trust is now reviewing how it manages this site, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Another threat to the geological heritage at the site is a lack of protection. Whenever you tell people you've got a World Heritage Site, people automatically assume that that brings with it an element of protection. But a World Heritage Site is not a form of statutory protection, so there's no legislation specifically relating to World Heritage Sites. The World Heritage Site itself gets its protection under spatial planning regulations in Northern Ireland, so consideration should be given to any development that will affect the Giant's Causeway. And this actually led to serious concern around about 10 years ago, whenever the Giant's Causeway was actually really investigated by UNESCO because there was a planned development that could have a serious impact on the site. It was previously noted as being of significant concern. However, the development has been stopped and is not being planned for the future. So at present, the site is seen as being of good heritage status. But that is something that will need to be looked at and could potentially happen again. On the plus side, the site enjoys other designations. So it's got international designations in the form of 2 special areas of conservation. One is marine, one is terrestrial. Of course, they are not for geological heritage, they are purely for their biodiversity. It's also protected under national legislation. It's an area of special scientific interest for both earth science interest, but also for its biological science interest. It's also a national nature reserve and an area of outstanding natural beauty, or certainly set within larger ones. But those 2, of course, are not because of their geology or their geological heritage. They, once again, are for their natural environment and for their biodiversity. So in reality, the geological heritage does not have a huge amount of specific protection. And then another threat, and probably the most significant threat to the geological heritage, is climate change. We all know about climate change. I'm sure everyone hears about climate change on a daily basis. But we've been carrying out research at the Giant's Causeway and a number of other UNESCO sites locally, excuse me, that are based on geological heritage, just to try and understand the impact of climate change on those sites. And we've identified that there are a number of key climate stressors that will particularly impact upon the Giant's Causeway: sea level change, extreme temperature events, precipitation change, storm intensity and frequency, but all have an impact specifically on the geological heritage. If sea level rises, we won't be able to see the columns that are actually at the shore. Extreme temperature events, precipitation change, storm intensity and frequency all lead to increased slope instability. And we've seen that increase around about tenfold in the last 10 years. Sometimes geological heritage is often ignored when it comes to looking at climate change. The study on the right-hand side is one that was done for UNESCO on World Heritage, and it actually goes as far to saying that geological heritage will not be specifically affected by climate change. Now, I know thoughts are changing on that, thankfully, but it is something that is frequently ignored. And although it will have an impact on the geological heritage, that then will have an impact on the tourism aspects of the site. It will affect the number of visitors that will be able to visit. It'll also therefore affect the contribution to the local economy. And there are lots of visitors that come to that site to enjoy the walks. Some of that slope instability will lead to paths being closed, and that will then affect the recreational value of the site too. Just to show you an example of some of these slope instability issues that we're currently seeing, we particularly are seeing areas of rockfall. So the picture on the left-hand side is an area of spheroidal weathering. This is the main access path down to the causeway, and we're seeing regular rockfalls. And you'll see in the middle there, that is one of the paths around the cliff. We're seeing regular rockfalls there as well. And I don't know if you can see the gate here. This gate is actually a closed section of the path. And if you remember, I said that the path along the middle of the slope was closed in 1994. This is because of a significant landslide. So there's a debris flow just round the corner that's closed that middle path altogether, and it's never been reopened. And that is going to increase and will potentially impact upon the rest of the site. This path in particular is a path called the Shepherd Steps that takes you down from the sea level right up to the top of the cliff. It is probably closed once every 2 months. That is how frequent these events are taking place. So it is having a real impact on not only the geological heritage of the site, as it is certainly being, well, I'm not going to say destroyed because it's a natural process, but it's certainly having an impact on the tourism side of the site too. However, these are all the negative aspects. There are certainly opportunities for geological heritage through geological tourism at the Giant's Causeway. The Giant's Causeway is undoubtedly our most iconic geological heritage site. I would go as far to say as it is known all the way around the world. That means that we have a really good opportunity to promote geological heritage in Northern Ireland, but all the way across the UK and Ireland as well, through the Giant's Causeway. And we have done that. So the pictures on the screen there are from a project that was done by the Geological Society of London back in 2014. The idea was to identify the top 100 geological sites across the UK and Ireland. And not surprisingly, the Giant's Causeway came out as one of the top sites. However, there were 5 sites in total in Northern Ireland identified. And by using the Giant's Causeway images, it meant that we were able to promote all those other geosites as well. And not only the 5 in Northern Ireland, but all of those across the UK and the rest of Ireland too. We've also seen this in the most recent IUGS Top 100 Geosites project, because the Giant's Causeway was number 5 in the sites in the book. Not surprisingly, because it is an iconic site for geological heritage. It was in the section under the importance of geological heritage for geological science, because it was one of the sites that helped to prove the origin of igneous rocks. But the fact that we were able to get it in there as number 5, it is one of only 4 in the UK and the only one on the island of Ireland that made it into that book. And it actually got a lot of attention locally, particularly amongst Northern Ireland government officials. So this is a picture from the Minister for the Department for the Economy, who really put out a statement, and this was put around all the social media and all the news around Northern Ireland. And we thought this was really particularly good for us, because sometimes when you're sitting within the Department for the Economy as a geological survey, you sometimes get ignored But whenever you can get your geological heritage to have an impact on the economy and to actually make ministers see how important that is, that's really good for us, and it helps people to understand geological heritage and its impact on the economy as well. And then my final section is to talk about how we can use sites like the Giant's Causeway as catalysts for change. I've already mentioned that it is a fantastic tourist site, but what I haven't told you is really the amount of impact that this site has for the Northern Ireland economy. So I'm just going to read you out a number of figures. So the Giant's Causeway in 2019 contributed, or certainly helped to generate, £484 million for the local economy. It paid £1.5 million in wages to local people. And in the visitor centre, the shop that they have, 80% of the crafts on sale were from the local area. So it'll give you an idea of the significance of that site. So whenever we see issues at that site, such as geological hazards, and we can tell people that they're going to have a real impact on the economy, it does make people sit up and listen. So it really allows us to have, if you like, a platform to carry out work that we might not otherwise be able to do. One of the examples I put on the screen is a project that we're involved in called AGEO, which is to look at geohazard risk management. So we are working with the National Trust to monitor the site, to help to understand the geological hazards, what their triggers are, how we can contribute to risk management. And in doing so, it's helped us to better understand not just the Giant's Causeway, but the wider area of the Antrim coast. It's also given us that, if you like, that visibility. If people see the causeway, they're automatically interested. And this in turn then helps us to better control the impact on tourism as well. And then finally, my final slide is just to mention the work of the National Trust. So I've already mentioned the fact that the National Trust are rethinking the way they operate. By looking at geological heritage and by looking at the impact that lots of visitors have, it gives us a real opportunity to really think about how those two work together and how we can better manage those sites, because we do still want people to visit. We want people to appreciate and enjoy our geological heritage, but we want them to do it and not have an impact, or certainly not have a negative impact on the site. So the National Trust have commissioned a sustainability study. It's the first study of its kind in the UK and Ireland. And the idea of it is to identify all of the challenges and opportunities for conservation, for the visitor experience, for looking at the infrastructure capacity, and then look at the impact of tourism on the community and also on those who live and work nearby. Now, this work started in 2019 and the results have been delayed due to COVID-19. But we're really hopeful that the Giant's Causeway in particular and the National Trust can really act as, if you like, a pilot site for other sites of geological heritage in particular, but also natural heritage, so we can understand how to better manage them, looking at the geological heritage and understanding how it is impacted by visitors and how we can make sure that people can still visit in a responsible way well into the future. And I'm going to finish up there, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kirstin. That has been really nice, and I think it's, well, all three are very good examples of how us from the geological surveys can contribute really with all the different aspects for the management of the geological heritage, and how we can contribute to society, which is the main objective of this webinar series. I'm sure there must be questions. I have not looked in the chat, and we will open also for the those who are watching. We already have, let's see, 47 persons here, and I don't know if you can make your questions in written in the chat, or I suppose there will be no problem to open the microphones always with due respect to all the audience and to the speakers. I already have some questions, but I think it's better if we open for the participants from the public. If you want to, if anybody raises their hands, and if not, I will go ahead with some of the questions that I have noted. For example, one question I have to begin with this is for Elisa. In the first, if you can open your cameras, Linda and Elisa. Elisa, I would like to ask you, for the future of these trails and panels that you have designed. This was previous to the pandemic, as I understood, no? And,
Yes.
Because for example, the marks. Let me turn on my camera. Sorry, I didn't. I thought it was on. Is it? No, there. I'm curious because you have used the space that is clearly white with no lichens, no moss, no any vegetation that has resulted from this latest earthquake, and this will also with time be recovered by the vegetation, by the moss, by the lichens, and so now it is very clear because it is very recent, just a few
Yes,
years ago.
it's very recent because
But it will evolve.
yeah.
So my
Yes.
question in particular is, what are you planning? Are you planning to clean the surfaces? Are you planning to mark with a line, or
No,
what will you do with time as years come?
One intervent is about plate where not we but the park pose two plaque first and later the earthquake. The plate there was a photo, and another activity is to put a special resins that is possible to use also for the monuments to preserve from the pollution and the lichens and the others, only for a little space, 1 meter, for example, to put on the surface faulting, and it could preserve the white.
Okay, so you are planning for the future to how to manage this, because I suppose that for the visitors, that is the most clear evidence, that when you look from the
Yes.
distance and when you get closer, and it is important to manage when the geological process takes place in between periods, and that.
Yes, because now
evolution.
is so clear, so white as is possible to observe also too far. But in I don't know, 10, 20 years, surely became the same the rest of the slope.
Surface, yes. Okay, so that's also important then for everybody to consider, that the specialists must contribute to the particular case of specificities of the site, of the geosite that is managed. Okay. And I don't know, well, we also have a question here. Kirstin is already responding in written, but maybe you want to respond open for everybody?
Yep, I'm happy to do that. So I have a question that asks if I have done any special studies to estimate the impact of projected sea level rise over the next 100 years. So the figures that I've been using are based. Sorry, Enrique. So the figures I've used have been based on those that are projected by the Meteorological Office, or the Met Office in the UK, and those that are being produced as part of the UK climate projections. So they're the estimates that we have used. And then there's another question is, are you planning any special management action in this way? So there's no specific action. However, we are working with the National Trust to develop climate change adaptation plans. So this was based on a research project that was carried out to fully assess the impacts of climate change on geological heritage sites, and also to assess their ability to adapt to climate change. So there are recommendations produced as part of that, and we are working through those recommendations. If anybody would like to see that project, I'm happy to send that on.
I suppose that everybody will be interested also. I mean, apart from the reports that you are doing or that you would like to do, the special interest would be also, what would you suggest in case you would have money or in case you would have sufficient time? What do you think would be proper to do in these cases?
So that's a really good question, because the National Trust is a conservation charity. So they are not very keen on, I suppose, putting any hard engineering solutions into the coastline. They see the coastline as being dynamic. And I think that is a very good attitude to take, because as we all know, we're not going to be able to stop climate change. We just need to be able to better live with it. So I think I can't really answer that at the moment, Enrique. I think we just need to sit down with the National Trust and work out how they're going to deal with climate change adaptation. I suspect it will be dealt with through looking at better site management, maybe redirecting paths. It'll also be done through education locally, and it'll probably also be done by maybe looking at some nature-based solutions, but I need to talk to them more first. I will maybe get back to you in about a year's time.
Okay, we will have more webinars in the future and keep
Exactly.
updated. And I also have, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I would go for Linda, one question, because you were saying that, I mean, there's these three main, the waterfall, this very old tree, and the rain disaster that are the most, of the biggest interest for the tourists that are going there. And then they ask these questions about the rocks that you are trying to support the guides there at the national park so they can respond properly. And I suppose this is only in, I suppose it is not only in this national park. So I would like to know how the Geological Survey is supporting in general the needs that come in similar respects in the protected areas in Sweden, and if this is working or helping at all.
We don't do it automatically. We just work with these questions when we have external funded projects today, unfortunately. It would be very nice to have a budget within the survey that we could work better with the environmental agency, for instance, which is the organization responsible for all the national parks. The good thing with these projects have been that we have had a very good contact with the county administrative board, which is the local organization working with the protected areas and the national parks within their region. So we have learned a lot about how their work is done and under what conditions they have to work. And quite often when we talk about geology with them, they become quite happy because I mean, to protect or not to protect, but to preserve a geosite. In some cases, it's actually easier than conservation and preservation of a biological site. So when you tell them that, well, you can actually go quite hard on this rock site with a brush, then they are happy, and they can take away trees. They are happy as well. So I think we have taught them quite a lot about how geology works in these projects, and we hope that they can actually take that further on to their colleagues.
Okay, and one more question for you, Linda, because at least in Spain we have had many examples of problems with the management of protected areas. When you have a viewpoint, the vegetation grows, the trees grow, and there is you don't see anymore the landscape. I don't know if you have had this case. I think in the Giant's Causeway there's not so many trees, but I noticed that in your national park, and probably also Elisa may have a similar issue with the vegetation growing, and then you have to tell the park to cut trees.
Yes, growing vegetation is a problem for landscape views. Yes, we have some examples of nature reserves in the Dalarna region where we were talking about, because it was a canyon, a quite small canyon in limestone. So there's a lot of vegetation, and today quite large spruces, for instance. But the good thing in that case was that the management also wanted to take away the spruces because they weren't really supposed to be there. So we could sort of take that spruce and that spruce and that spruce, and then you can actually get the shape of the canyon. So we were quite happy, and they were also happy.
So then the conclusion is that it is possible, always under agreement and with having a common objective, I suppose, for the
I think
public use.
I think in many cases it's about trying to explain to them why, because they just don't have sufficient knowledge about geology and what's hidden.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Elisa? Do you have any comment regarding this management for the viewpoints? Because I noticed you have some panels, but I didn't see many trees in this.
No, fortunately, in this area, there aren't. Is a vegetation very little, only
Bushes,
rocks,
maybe.
and there aren't trees.
Mm-hmm.
Is a zone very clear, very clean from vegetation.
Well, the vegetation is not dirty, but it is, it's, I suppose, a problem with the priorities in the management, because there are examples when you have lost the purpose of the viewpoint when.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
If
Clear.
maybe Kirstin, do you want to add anything regarding this problem with the viewpoints and the management? No.
We don't really have any problems with viewpoints. Certainly not from vegetation. The only problem with viewpoints we would have would be too many people, not plants.
Too many people. So what are you doing in that case? Well, how do you control? Do you limit the number of people? Do they have to make reservations?
So they do now. So prior to COVID, there was no reservations needed at all. But now you do have to book. And the National Trust are struggling, I think, financially as a result, because they did depend on the money from visitors, not just to fund the Giant's Causeway, but actually the money that came to the Giant's Causeway helps other National Trust properties across Northern Ireland. So it is something they're having to get a balance as to whether we have more visitors or more money. So yeah, it is a bit of an issue, but no problems with vegetation except a little bit on the stones. That is, as I mentioned, were brought in on people's shoes. You get seeds brought in sometimes, but that's really it.
Actually, there is a question from Thais Kanesing regarding this.
Yes, so with regards to the carrying capacity, that is something that's being looked at as part of the sustainability study that's being done at the moment. So that is being looked at very much so for the Giant's Causeway and the adjacent site of Carrigareed, which is another geological heritage site. So they're looking at what the carrying capacity is, what the optimum visitor number is, and then they're going to produce recommendations, but that is not completed yet. It's been delayed because of COVID, but it should be out soon.
And I suppose something that you mentioned, which is with the climate change in the last decade, all this increase of the slope processes and the rock falls and all this that generates problems for the accessing for the itineraries and all these things, no? For the management of the public use, I suppose. No?
Yeah, that's having a really quite a big impact. And the project I mentioned there, the IGEO project, whenever GSNI originally got involved in that project, we actually had another site in mind. We had Quilca Mountain, which is out to the west, and it was looking at peat slides instead. But before the project started, we were getting calls from the Giant's Causeway and the National Trust, basically on a monthly basis, because of landslide events. They wanted us to come and look at them and tell them what to do. So we actually changed the pilot site from Quilca Mountain in the west to the Giant's Causeway, because we reckoned that it was, number one, have a higher impact because it was going to help us to understand what's happening at a key tourist site, but also it would help people to listen to us. So certainly the tourism NI, if we're doing work at the Giant's Causeway, they will perhaps listen to us now. So yeah, it is quite a big issue, and it's increasing. We've seen it increase even in the time of the project.
Yeah, one of the things that we are hoping through our Geoheritage Expert Group of the EuroGeo surveys is to be able to include in the map that is available in our web also all the geosites, so that the tourism companies, agencies, and the national governments or the local authorities can see what geological heritage they have around that they can use for the tourism. And so in this respect, I would like, I don't know if any of you three would have any comments regarding, in particular, when you propose sites, do you specify also if a site is more proper for education, for tourism, for science, for any of those? So normally I would suppose, but is this has this helped with the tourism development? I don't know if any of you wants to respond in your particular case.
So Enrique, do you mean in your communication with the tourist bodies, do you specify whether they're useful for certain aspects? Is that what you mean?
More than towards the tourists, they just will adapt to whatever is when they arrive. But meaning particularly with what you provide to the administrations, to the government, to the local authorities, do they know about the sites which are better to be promoted for the tourism?
Just, I suppose, on our behalf, if I was ever speaking to local councils in particular about tourist sites, I would generally only talk about ones that are with public access, so are suitable for tourists. Therefore, they've got amenities, car park, trails, etc. And I generally would not promote any other sites. But that's more to do with the issues that we have here in Northern Ireland with landowners and access to land. I'm not entirely sure what it's like in the rest of Europe, but we are not allowed to walk on anybody's land without permission. I know other parts of the UK are different, but in Northern Ireland we're not allowed to, and that's why I do that.
Okay. How about you, Linda?
In our new database, we can actually mark out if a site is appropriate for education or for tourism, or if it's just a pure scientific site.
That's good.
And we hope to, if we get money for a new project, that we can actually do some kind of automatic valuation of these aspects. So if you change one attribute, for instance, it sort of recalculates
Itself.
Yes, so you don't have to do that evaluation again, sort of, so to speak. But we'll see.
Do you want to say something, Elisa, about in your inventory? Did you apply any of these? For example, when you chose the areas that were going to be used in Mount Vettore, for the itineraries or for the viewpoints, I suppose you get enough.
Not now. At this moment, we organized only a course for a guide, for park guides, but for people or for school or education, now still not. In future is possible, we hope.
Okay. Well, I was also referring maybe in the beginning, before you designed the areas where you would bring the tourists. I suppose you also previously had to talk with the local authorities.
For example, guides, the park guides must be something.
Okay, I don't know. No, we don't have any more questions here. Okay, so one, I don't know if we are supposed to stop in 4 minutes. So if any of you wants to make some statement or some recommendations for in conclusion, and then I will just finish up with some of conclusions also. Do you want to say anything else? Okay, well then, thank you very much to all three. I think it was a great opportunity to hear directly from the persons that are working on site with the geotourism, with the help, with the specialist knowledge from people that work in geoconservation and geoheritage at the geological surveys. I think that it has been very obvious from the conclusions of all three of the talks that geoheritage can contribute to local socioeconomic development. It is important for tourism. It is important also to be considered for the preservation of the sites of nature, of geological heritage and natural heritage in protected areas, in World Heritage sites. And so I hope that this will keep contributing to this type of similar objectives in the future. And so thank you all. We already have more than 40 participants in our webinar, and I encourage you to keep online, to keep updated with our webinars for the future. We will also be talking with other issues, for example, about the mining heritage or geological heritage in relation to mining areas, also more specifically with protected areas in the future. And so thank you all again, and goodbye. Be aware also that this has been recorded, and it will, as soon as we have it uploaded to the channel, to the YouTube channel of